was an excellent presentation. I felt like you were presenting my experience in my life, and I thank you for that. Keep doing your research. Yeah. So hi, I'm Dannielle Samuel, and I live here in Ottawa, and I am a social worker by profession, and I am a clinical director of my own firm. I'm one of those Black women who went away and decided to create my own work because I wasn't finding myself in the institutions that I was working in. So today I'm going to talk to you about being a joyful clinician. And I'm not just talking about those of us who are counselors or therapists or psychologists. I'm talking about all of us in our professions. We're here for a reason because we want to learn about Black mental health and we want to push the whole industry forward. So I'm going to get you to think about that as I go through my presentation. Thank you. So I'm going to offer you 5 steps thank you. Okay, now I'm all set. I'm going to offer you 5 steps to getting yourself prepared to receive the Black clients or people that you work with. And so these are 5 steps that I have used and have built over time, over my practice, over my time in private practice, but also in my 18 years in medical social work and being ready for various kinds of clients. So this is not steeped in research. This is steeped in wisdom. Okay? So these 5 steps here, I'm going to go very quickly through the first 2 or 3 because I want to get to the emerging modalities piece, which is really where I needed to find myself. And then the last piece I'll talk about how we have to make sure to connect to ourselves. So the first thing I'll tell you is that the reason I wanted to figure out these 5 steps is because I was trained in a time when there were no Black professors. I was not trained by anyone Black in my career. And I had maybe 2, maybe 3 Black colleagues studying alongside me. So a lot of the thinking that I had to do was on my own and with my family and with my community. And it turned out to be a good thing because I'm still working. I still enjoy my work. And I learned very, very quickly to rely on my community. So I don't want to understate this. We're blessed to be together today and have so many of us know and want to share our expertise. But I came from a time where we had to rely on our community in order to move ahead. So when I talk about understanding the importance of our history and our way of being, I can't understate it enough. So when we know about our background, our history, our family, all of that, it really helps to ground us in who we are exactly. And so when we know about colonialism and the effects of it and how our families talk about it, how our communities talk about it, this is very, very important. Now, I'm a Black Canadian, and so is my mother, and so is her mother, and so is her mother. So I'm rooted here in Canadian culture, Canadian history, but from a Black person lens. Come from the Underground Railroad. I know I have relatives in Gaithersburg, Massachusetts, and I've met them. We get together every 2 years, and I know that my family is based out of Buxton, Ontario, and did some farming down there. I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly that I belong here in Canada because I've been here, right? Okay. So I want you to know the same thing about your story. Now, a lot of my Black friends and family and my neighbors have immigrated to Canada, and that's a different experience, and they tell me a different story, but they belong here too because they made it here, despite all of the obstacles that our immigration system presents to them, right? And then we talk about how to live here, how to get banking all sorted, how to get jobs, all of those things. Miracle sometimes that we're actually here. But this is important to know your story, right? Now, next, I want to talk about building your Afrocentric cultural competency. We've had several speakers over this week tell us about making sure we're culturally competent. These are some of the courses and assessments that I do in order to make myself culturally competent. Great things, but there's more. There's so many more. And the idea is when you make yourself culturally competent, you also have to think about intersectionality. So that last course that I took there, I took that about 2 years ago with the Friendship Center's fantastic course that really gives you the rich history of our Indigenous peoples, our sisters, in understanding what was taken from us. So I really, really encourage you to do that work around cultural competence. Cannot understate it. It is so, so important. Then, when we build our muscles around our cultural competency, in my practice, what I tend to do is remember these principles. The Ubuntu principle is really important to me. It's what I've based my practice on. My liberation is wrapped up in your liberation. I cannot do my work without you being here, and I cannot enjoy the success of my work unless you are successful. So this means to me that because of the Ubuntu principle, I cannot move forward without you moving forward with me. Also, the 7 Kwanzaa principles have been invaluable when I'm working with my clients. And I don't think I mentioned this, but I'm a clinician here in Ottawa who works solely with the Black community. If you are not from BIPOC community, Black community, I get to refer you on to the various other therapists, right? So for me, using these Kwanzaa principles has been super, super helpful, not only because it gives me a same language that I get to work with my clients and we learn about, as we learn about each other, but I actually can organize the treatment goals and the planning of where we need to go together based on those principles. So I invite you to think about that. The other thing that's really important is to have a model of wellness in your mind. Now, I have used the Taboo Center's model. It's on their website. It's excellent. Go see it. And here in Ottawa, the ACB Resource Center down on Donald Street also has an excellent model of wellness that just helps you to think about not just what's in front of you in terms of the problem being the problem, but what are all the structural barriers, the socioeconomic barriers. What is it that we need to do in terms of advocacy, in terms of making sure that our community is strong? And if you have that model, just even a picture stuck up on your desk, it'll help to remind you to use that. And then finally, when we're looking at our muscles, what is it that we have in our own pockets that we like to use, that just are little things that help us to remind us what our values are, how we like to work with our clients, what is expected of us, what do we expect of ourselves as we work with our clients. So for me, my toolkit includes these fun little things, and I'll just tell you what the 5 A's are because it's fun for me. Me and my sisters worked this out. So the 5 A's of anti-racism are awkwardness, knowing your biases, awareness, being aware that racism exists and don't ignore it. Ask and listen, which is really asking people the right questions to bring out and elicit questions around racism and oppression. And then educating yourself around those things, and then act. Making sure that if you see something or you hear something that doesn't quite resonate with your values, to not be afraid to say, hey, stop and talk about it. And then finally, address. And has to do with addressing policies and procedures that really do not align with your own values and with those practices in the system that create those barriers. So this is something that I have in my mind that's floating around, that's posted in my office, and that I share with my clients so that they know exactly what I'm about from the get-go as they come in, and so that when something comes up during our sessions that doesn't align with that, because they know that's my value, that I say, I'm going to call myself out on that, or I'm going to invite you to call me out on those things. And it has happened, and it's great. So this is the fun part. This is the juicy part. So, when we talk about the training and the modalities and all of the theories that we use as clinicians out there, we often say, but how does that relate to my upbringing or my tradition? How does that relate to the Black experience? So what I'm going to talk about is how I have incorporated, I've looked at some of the modalities that I use and how I've sort of merged some of those modalities with some Afrocentric and Dannielle-centric ways. Okay? So the first one I'll talk about is strengths perspective. I was trained very well in strength perspective. And the strengths perspective talks about these 6 principles. I'm not going to talk about them. You can go and read about them, or about them. But the 2 that I want to highlight are collaboration is the conduit, and number 6, naturally occurring resources are considered first before going to the formally constituted mental health resources. And this is important. Collaboration in our communities, in the Black diaspora, incredibly important. We don't do things to up the individual. We do things to raise the community, the collective, right? Right? So for me, as I use that thinking in my mind, I think about what it is that the person in front of me has around them. What supports do they have around them? Who can they call on? What grandma, what auntie, what imam, what do they have already in their community that's important to them that they can call on? And sometimes they've gone to those resources and they've gotten not the answer they were hoping for, and that's okay. I say, let's go back. Let's think about how we can approach them. How can we say something to them that will elicit the response that you're looking for? Always seeing if we can use those resources first before we go up in that stepwise approach that I learned yesterday. So that is strengths perspective. That's how that is infused in my practice. Then we look at narrative therapy. Now, who doesn't like a good story, right? And the art of storytelling is what narrative therapy is all about. And I was trained as a narrative therapist first and foremost. But when I was trained as a narrative therapist, I was trained to think of stories clinically. And then when I went back into private practice, I resisted that urge to think clinically, but rather I wanted to think spiritually. And that is where the art of storytelling comes out. So when I think about this modality now, I don't think of thinking about therapeutically what's the issue, what's the problem, how do I quantify it, how do I get at it. I first think about what is their story. What is it telling about themselves? And if they can't tell me their story, or they don't want to talk to me because they don't trust me because they still think I'm part of the system, I ask them about what's your favorite fable? Or what do you remember your mom or your dad telling you? What are some stories from back home that you really enjoy? And they sometimes look at me like, why do you want me to tell a story? And I'm like, because That is how we organize our mind and our lives. And I want to hear a story from you, even if it isn't yours yet. And usually I'm able to get them talking. And even if I can't get them talking about that story, even just talking about the idea of story usually gets us on the right path. So this is what I do around narrative therapy. Solution-focused therapy, I love that miracle question. And here I offer you another way of looking at that miracle question. Miracle question is if you woke up the next day and something had changed and the problem that you had was gone, what would you do? What would you say? Well, this miracle question works great with my clients who are really struggling with work and feeling isolated in work, and gets the conversation going again around what is the problem and what would it take for it to move to be away or to disappear. So these are some fun things. So I'm not going to go too much more. Internal family systems, I have way different way of looking at parts and how that goes. I really believe that we all have an elder and an ancestor growing inside of us from the get-go, from the moment we can speak. And so I get people to really think about that. And so these are just the ways that I have merged the modalities in a way that makes sense to me, that infuses what I have learned from my family, from my culture and community. And it takes those pieces those theoretical pieces, those pieces that didn't feel like me, into who I am now today. And so this last step, step 5, is around deepening your sense of self. And this is words that I learned at the Black Summit in 2022 from Robert Wright, who's from Nova Scotia and runs his own clinical center. Actually, he's retired now. But also listening to Dr. Sana last time, 2 years ago. And that the one thing that they both said is that we need to stay well. We need to stay well as clinicians, as people. We need to be healthy so that we can continue to do this kind of work. And we need to really make sure that we put our health first. Because if we don't put our own health first, then we can't support others to be healthy. Okay? And then going down the list, increase our collective competence. So here, coming to things like this, having the dialogue, but making sure that you stay in touch with those people that you connected with at conferences, in the community, all of those things, making sure that you continue to connect. And then so that it'll give you the opportunity to do all the rest of those things, which is innovate, which is what we're doing today, and staying Afrocentric. And I wish I'd put the word staying unapologetically Afrocentric, right? I should have put that word in. So I encourage you to do that. And then be clear, make sure to collect the data. Make sure to insist that the data is collected, that the information is collected. And then continue to educate yourself, be engaging as much as possible, be unafraid to share your information and wear the shoes. And the last thing is nothing for us without us. That's it.
All right. Do we have any questions for Dannielle? We'll take like 1 or 2 questions just to make sure that we have time for our last presentation.
Thanks, Dannielle. Just going back to what we found in our project about Black women or people of color coming into wanting to get into mental health work or healthcare work and feeling like they don't have the educational capacity or having feelings of educational inadequacy. What's advice that you would offer to people who are feeling that way before they even make the steps to go and do the studies and get into the work?
Thank you. Yes, imposter syndrome is real, eh? Yeah. I would say for other Black women to again, talk to other Black women, talk with your neighbors, talk with your sisters, and don't be afraid to name it, because the thing about not the thing about not naming it is that you become isolated in your own way and way of thinking, and you think that no one else understands you. And this is part of the systemic barriers that we've all lived with all our lives, right? So the way that we don't play their game is that we speak to each other, right? And we speak to each other with respect and know that we're going to be heard. That's what I would say. That's what I wished I had done earlier. Yeah.
Do we have another question?
Thank you so much, Dannielle, for this. I found it to be very personally helpful. I also work here as a clinician in mental health here in Ottawa. And I attended this conference the first time it happened. And I remember sitting in some of the sessions and thinking about this question: how do we put these models into practice, into our everyday sessions with our clients? And I'm really appreciating seeing how you've merged the Afrocentric way into your own practice, and seeing Dannielle in that practice as well. The question that I have is, how have you stayed rooted in joy? It's not lost on me that that's the title for today's session. And I think claiming that joy is such an important piece when we're doing the work that we're doing. So that's the question.
Thank you for saying that. And I wish I had said more during my presentation around that. But the way that I stay rooted in joy and in my Black joy is that I keep my confidence level up, my competence level up. I make sure that I feel like I can actually do the work, so that when I feel like I can do that, then I feel confident, and then I feel joyful. Simple as that. When I feel confident and in center, I feel joyful. The other piece that I will say to you is that it was super creative to actually merge those, right? I had to really sit down and think, what are the modalities that I really enjoy working with, that I know fully and feel like I can actually do the work? And how can I merge exactly who I am, which is a strong Black woman, into that? How can I do that? So I really had to think, and I had to use my creative side of my brain. So when I'm creative, I'm super joyful, right? And so that's what works for me. But I hope that many of you have a creative side. Most of us have a creative side. We just choose to ignore it because we think we have to work more, or we have things that are more of a priority. But the creative side of us is us truly. When I talk about internal family systems, we talk about the self and the core of us. And this is the richness of us. When we are creative, we are in flow. And so I do as much as I can to be in flow. So I keep my competence muscles up and I stay in flow. And then I talk to my mom every week. I still like my mom. Right? I talk to her every week. We do a family call. So I'm rooted in my community all the time. And I do volunteer work in my community with the Black Youth Forum here in Ottawa. So there's things that keep me right here grounded in my joy. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Thank you, Dannielle. Thank you for your questions. Now we have our last presentation.